The morning sun crested over the jagged mountains of Montana Territory in 1878, casting long shadows across the dusty main street of Silver Creek as Nora Ellis stumbled from the stagecoach, her once fine dress now travel-worn and her eyes red from days of crying. She clutched a crumpled letter in her gloved hand, the final correspondence from her family back east, disowning her completely. Nora inhaled deeply, the crisp mountain air filling her lungs as she took in the frontier town before her. Silver Creek was nothing like Boston, with its wooden buildings, hitching posts lined with horses, and men in dusty clothes moving purposefully along the boardwalks. She had come west with nothing but a small trunk of possessions, and the desperate hope of starting anew where no one knew her name or her shame. The stagecoach driver tossed down her trunk unceremoniously, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Nora coughed, pulling a handkerchief from her sleeve to cover her mouth. "First time in Silver Creek, miss?" the driver asked, not unkindly. "Yes," Nora replied, squinting up at the weathered man. "I'm to take a position as a schoolteacher." The driver nodded, seeming to approve. "Town's been needing one since Miss Holloway up and married that banker from Helena. School's just down the way, past the general store." Nora thanked him, though her heart pounded at the mention of a school. She had credentials, real ones, but her reference letters were forged. If anyone looked too closely into her past, they'd discover why Boston's finest families had closed their doors to her. "Need help with that trunk, madam?" a deep voice asked from behind her. Nora turned to find herself looking up at a tall man with broad shoulders and a face bronzed by the sun. His blue eyes were startling against his tanned skin, and though he wore the dusty clothes of a working man, he carried himself with quiet confidence. A worn leather holster hung at his hip, but it was his eyes that caught her attention, kind yet watchful, as if he'd seen enough of the world to be cautious. "I would appreciate that, thank you," Nora replied, maintaining the proper distance a lady should keep from a stranger. "Name's Bryce Morgan," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I run the Morgan Ranch just outside town." "Nora Ellis," she offered, noting how easily he lifted her trunk. "I'm the new schoolteacher." A slight smile crossed his face. "Then we've been expecting you, Miss Ellis." "Town's been without a teacher for 3 months now. Parents are getting desperate." They walked in companionable silence toward the small boarding house where arrangements had been made for her. Nora felt eyes watching her from shop windows and porches, the curious gazes of a small town taking in the newcomer. "Don't mind the staring," Bryce said quietly. "New faces are a novelty here, especially ones as—" He cleared his throat, "educated as yourself." Nora felt her cheeks warm slightly at what seemed like a compliment. "I'm hardly remarkable, Mr. Morgan." "That's where you're wrong, Miss Ellis." His voice was matter-of-fact, not flirtatious. "Anyone willing to come all this way to teach a bunch of ranch hands and miners' children deserves some admiration." They reached the boarding house, a modest 2-story building with white curtains in the windows and a small porch adorned with potted wildflowers. As Bryce set down her trunk, the door opened to reveal a plump woman with graying hair and a welcoming smile. "You must be Miss Ellis," the woman exclaimed. "I'm Martha Winters. You'll be staying with me. Thank you for bringing her, Bryce. Will you stay for some coffee?" Bryce shook his head, placing his hat back on. "Got to get back to the ranch. Cattle don't wait for social calls." He turned to Nora with a slight bow. "Welcome to Silver Creek, Miss Ellis. I expect I'll see you around town." As he walked away, Nora couldn't help but notice the easy strength in his stride and the respectful nods he received from townsfolk. Clearly, Bryce Morgan was someone of consequence in Silver Creek. "That's a good man," Martha said, following Nora's gaze. "One of the few eligible bachelors worth considering in these parts," though he keeps to himself mostly. Lost his parents young and built that ranch up all on his own. Nora forced herself to look away. I'm not here for marriage prospects, Mrs. Winters. I've come to teach. Martha's eyes twinkled knowingly as she ushered Nora inside. Of course, dear. Now let me show you to your room. You must be exhausted from your journey. The boarding house was clean and modest, with simple furnishings that spoke of practicality rather than luxury. Nora's room was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a small writing desk, and a window overlooking the main street. It was nothing like her family's grand home in Boston, but it offered something far more valuable: freedom from judgment. Once alone, Nora sank onto the bed and finally allowed herself to cry silently, the tears she'd been holding back spilling down her cheeks. She pulled out the letter again, reading the harsh words that had severed her from everything she'd ever known. You have brought unforgivable shame upon this family, her father had written. Do not attempt to contact us again. You are no longer our daughter. All because she had dared to speak out against a powerful man who had taken liberties with several young women in their social circle, including herself. When she'd brought accusations against the son of her father's business partner, the scandal had threatened to ruin not just her reputation but her family's standing. Rather than stand by her, they had chosen their social position, forcing her to leave with nothing but the small inheritance from her grandmother that they couldn't legally keep from her. Nora wiped her tears and moved to the window, watching the town of Silver Creek as twilight descended. This would be her home now, these strangers her neighbors. She would build a new life here, one where her past couldn't touch her. Little did she know that her past was already on its way to find her. The next morning, Nora awoke early, determined to make a good impression on her first day. She dressed in her most sensible gray dress with a crisp white collar, pinned her chestnut hair into a neat bun, and headed downstairs, where Martha had prepared a hearty breakfast. The school board chairman, Mr. Peterson, will meet you at the schoolhouse at 8 o'clock, Martha informed her as she poured coffee. He's also our town mayor and owns the bank. A bit stuffy, but fair-minded. Nora nodded, trying to calm her nerves. How many children will I be teaching? About 20, ranging from 6 to 16. Some only come when they're not needed on the ranches, especially the older boys. But now that harvest is over, you should have a full house. After breakfast, Martha walked Nora to the schoolhouse, a simple one-room building at the edge of town with a small bell tower on top. A tall, distinguished gentleman in a black suit was waiting on the steps, pocket watch in hand. Mr. Peterson, Martha called, here's our new teacher, right on time. William Peterson was in his 50s with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He appraised Nora with a critical eye. Miss Ellis, welcome to Silver Creek. Your credentials from Boston are impressive. We rarely get teachers with such qualifications. Nora swallowed her anxiety. Thank you, sir. I'm looking forward to beginning. Very good. The children will arrive at 9. The school board expects regular reports on their progress. While we're a frontier town, we value education highly. He handed her a large iron key. This is yours now. The previous teacher left lesson plans in the desk drawer. Inside, the schoolhouse was better equipped than Nora had expected, with rows of wooden desks facing a larger teacher's desk, a blackboard covering one wall, and shelves of books along another. A pot-bellied stove stood in the corner for winter heating. I'll leave you to get acquainted with your domain, Miss Ellis, Peterson said. The town has high hopes for you. After he left, Nora explored the room, running her fingers along the spines of the books, examining the maps hanging on the walls and reading through the lesson plans left by her predecessor. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt a glimmer of hope. Here, she could make a difference. At 9 o'clock, children began streaming in, eyeing her curiously as they took their seats. They came in all sizes, some scrubbed clean and neatly dressed, others bearing the dust of ranch life on their clothes. A few of the older boys sauntered in with the cockiness of youth testing boundaries. When the last child was seated, Nora took a deep breath and rang the small bell on her desk. "Good morning. I am Miss Ellis, your new teacher. I've come all the way from Boston to be here, and I'm very excited to get to know each of you." A small girl in the front row raised her hand immediately. "Yes," Nora acknowledged her. "Why'd you leave Boston?" "My pa says it's got real fancy buildings and ladies wear dresses that cost more than our whole house." The question caught Nora off guard. "Well, I wanted to see the West, and I heard Silver Creek needed a teacher." "My ma says ladies come west looking for husbands," called out one of the older boys, causing titters throughout the room. Nora felt her cheeks flush, but kept her composure. "I came west to teach, not to find a husband. Now, let's begin by introducing ourselves, shall we?" The morning progressed smoothly after that initial challenge. Nora assessed their knowledge levels, finding some surprisingly advanced and others struggling with basic reading. By noon, when she dismissed them for lunch, she felt cautiously optimistic. She was arranging books when a knock came at the open door. Looking up, she found Bryce Morgan leaning against the doorframe, hat in hand. "Mr. Morgan," she said, surprised, "Miss Ellis, thought I'd check how your first morning went. The children are." "Spirited," she replied with a small smile. He chuckled, stepping inside. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it, especially the Holbrook boys, I imagine." "They do seem to have boundless energy," Nora admitted, thinking of the two fair-haired brothers who had spent most of the morning nudging each other and passing notes. "Their father runs the saloon, not much discipline at home." Bryce glanced around the schoolroom. "Place looks good." Community pitched in to fix it up for the new teacher. "It's wonderful," Nora said sincerely. "I wasn't expecting such a well-equipped schoolhouse. Folks here want better for their children than they had. Most couldn't read until they were grown, if ever." He paused, studying her. "You're not what they expected, you know." Nora stiffened. "What do you mean?" "They expected someone older, more severe. Boston schoolmarms have a certain reputation out here." Despite herself, Nora laughed. "And what reputation is that?" "Spectacles, perpetually pursed lips, and a ruler always at the ready to rap knuckles." His blue eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Well, I do have a ruler," Nora replied, holding up the wooden measuring stick from her desk, "but I prefer to save it for mathematics." Their shared laughter felt good, natural in a way that surprised her. It had been a long time since Nora had laughed freely with anyone. "I actually came with an invitation," Bryce said. "There's a harvest social this Saturday at my ranch. The whole town comes. It would be a good way for you to meet everyone." "That's very kind, but I'm not sure if it's not just kindness, Miss Ellis. It's practically mandatory for new folks. Town tradition." His expression grew serious. "People here need to know who's teaching their children. Coming to the social shows you're willing to be part of the community." Nora hesitated, then nodded. "I understand. In that case, I would be delighted to attend." "Good. I'll have someone bring you out to the ranch around 4 o'clock. "That would be fine." As he turned to leave, he paused. "One more thing. There's a woman in town, Clara Stinson. She lost her husband last winter. Her boy, Tommy, didn't say a word during class, did he?" Nora thought of the solemn, dark-haired boy who had sat in the back corner. "No, he didn't. He hasn't spoken since his father died." "Clara's at her wit's end." Bryce's voice softened. "If anyone could reach him, well, it would mean a lot to her, to everyone." With that, he was gone, leaving Nora with a strange flutter in her stomach and a new sense of purpose. "Perhaps here," In this frontier town, she could find not just refuge but redemption. The remainder of the week passed in a whirlwind of lessons, getting to know the children and settling into life in Silver Creek. Nora quickly became a familiar sight walking to and from the schoolhouse each day, nodding to townsfolk who greeted her with increasing warmth. She paid special attention to Tommy Stinson, placing gentle encouragement in the margins of his written work, which revealed a bright mind trapped in silence. When he correctly solved a difficult arithmetic problem on Friday, she saw the ghost of a smile cross his face before he retreated back into his shell. Saturday morning found Nora in a state of uncharacteristic indecision about what to wear to the harvest social. Her wardrobe was limited to practical teaching clothes and the few personal items she'd brought from Boston. After trying several combinations, she settled on her best dress, a deep blue affair with modest lace at the collar and cuffs, more sophisticated than fancy, but the most appropriate option available. "You look lovely," Martha assured her as Nora fretted before the small mirror in the parlor. "Blue suits you brings out the color in your eyes. It's not too Eastern?" Nora asked anxiously. Martha chuckled. "Dear girl, half the women will be wearing their Sunday best trying to impress. The other half won't care a whit what anyone thinks. That's the beauty of the frontier, you can be yourself." A knock at the door announced Nora's escort, not Bryce, as she had half hoped, but a friendly older man named Joseph who worked at the Morgan Ranch. He drove a wagon, and the journey to the ranch took nearly an hour along winding dirt roads that climbed into the foothills. The Morgan Ranch exceeded Nora's expectations. A sprawling main house of hewn logs stood proudly on a rise, surrounded by barns, corrals, and bunkhouses. Behind it all, the mountains rose majestically, still capped with early snow despite the mild autumn day. Wagons and horses were already gathered in a large clearing where tables had been set up under strings of lanterns. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" Joseph said proudly as he helped Nora down from the wagon. Bryce built most of it himself after his folks passed. Started with nothing but determination and a few head of cattle. People mingled around tables laden with food, while a small band of musicians tuned their instruments on a makeshift platform. Children ran laughing through the open space, and the air smelled of roasting meat and fresh baked pies. Miss Ellis. Several of her students spotted her, waving enthusiastically. Their parents followed, introducing themselves and expressing gratitude for her teaching. "She got Billy reading a whole page yesterday," one mother said proudly of her son. "First time ever." Nora was explaining her teaching methods when she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she found Bryce, dressed in clean dark trousers and a white shirt with a vest, his hair still damp from washing. "You made it," he said, his smile genuine. "Welcome to Morgan Ranch." "It's magnificent," Nora replied honestly. "I had no idea it was so extensive." Pride flashed in his eyes. 10 years of hard work. "Come, let me show you around before the dancing starts." He led her on a brief tour, pointing out the various buildings and explaining ranch operations. Nora listened attentively, impressed by his knowledge and the respect evident in how the ranch hands greeted him. "And this is where I started," he said finally, stopping at a small, weathered cabin some distance from the main house. "My first home after my parents died. Lived here alone for 2 years before I could afford to hire help." Nora studied the modest structure. "How old were you?" 19 when they both took fever. "Had to grow up fast." His voice held no self-pity, just simple acknowledgement of facts. "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. "It must have been terribly difficult," Bryce shrugged. "Life happens as it will, we either bend with it or break." He glanced at her curiously. "What about your family, Miss Ellis? They must miss having their daughter so far away." Nora looked down, the familiar pain surfacing. We're estranged. They didn't approve of my coming west. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. Bryce seemed to sense her discomfort and didn't press further. Well, their loss is Silver Creek's gain. Shall we rejoin the festivities? The evening progressed pleasantly, with a communal supper followed by dancing. Nora was surprised to find herself in demand as a dance partner, though she noticed Bryce watching her from across the clearing as she was passed from one townsman to another. During a break in the dancing, Nora found a quiet spot away from the crowd. The night air had grown chilly, and she wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, gazing up at the stars that seemed impossibly bright and numerous compared to Boston's skies. It never gets old, Bryce said, appearing beside her and offering a cup of warm cider. The sky out here. It's breathtaking, Nora agreed, accepting the cider gratefully. In Boston, the buildings and gas lamps hide most of the stars. Is that what you miss most? The city lights? Nora considered the question. No, she answered honestly. I miss the libraries, perhaps, the bookshops, but not much else. We have books, Bryce said. Not as many as Boston, I'm sure, but my father was a great reader, left quite a collection. You're welcome to borrow any that interest you. That's very kind, Nora replied, genuinely touched. I would appreciate that. They fell into companionable silence, sipping cider and watching the revelry from a distance. The band had struck up a lively tune and couples whirled around the dance area. I haven't asked you to dance, Bryce observed. No, you haven't, Nora confirmed, a smile playing at her lips. Would you care to? Dance with me, that is. I would, yes. He took her empty cup and set it aside, then offered his hand. As they joined the other dancers, Nora was conscious of curious glances. Bryce Morgan dancing was apparently a noteworthy event. People are staring, she whispered as he guided her through the steps. Let them, he replied simply. I don't often dance. Why not? His hand was warm against her back as he turned her. Never found a partner worth the trouble. The implications of his words hung between them as they moved together. Bryce was a surprisingly graceful dancer for such a large man, leading with confidence but without force. You dance well for a cowboy, Nora observed. He chuckled. My mother insisted I learn, said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a wounded buffalo. The image made Nora laugh, and for a moment she felt light-hearted and free from the burden of her past. But reality intruded when she caught sight of Mayor Peterson watching them with a calculating expression. The dance ended, and Bryce escorted her back to the edge of the gathering. You've gone pale, he observed. Are you unwell? Just a little tired, Nora lied, unable to explain her sudden unease. Perhaps I should return to town soon. Concern creased his brow. Of course. I'll have Joseph take you back whenever you're ready. Before she could respond, they were interrupted by Clara Stinson, a slender woman with tired eyes and Tommy in tow. Miss Ellis, I wanted to thank you, Clara said earnestly. Tommy brought home his arithmetic paper yesterday. He was so proud of your comments. He's very bright, Nora replied, smiling at the boy who watched her solemnly. I particularly enjoy having him in class. To everyone's surprise, Tommy tugged at his mother's skirt and whispered something when she bent down. What's that, sweetheart? Clara asked, her voice trembling slightly. I like Miss Ellis, the boy whispered, just loud enough for them to hear. She doesn't make me talk, but she listens anyway. Clara's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at Nora. Those are the first words he's spoken in 8 months. Nora knelt to Tommy's level. Thank you, Tommy. That means a great deal to me. The boy nodded shyly, then whispered something else to his mother. He wants to know if you'll be at church tomorrow, Clara translated, wiping her eyes. I will indeed, Nora assured him. I'll look for you there. As Clara led Tommy away, both Nora and Bryce stood in stunned silence. "You did that," Bryce said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Whatever magic you worked, you brought that boy back." "I didn't do anything special," Nora protested. "I just treated him with patience." Bryce shook his head, looking at her with newfound respect. "Silver Creek needed you, Miss Ellis. I think perhaps we need you more than you need us." His words warmed something deep within her, a place that had been cold since that terrible day in Boston when everything had fallen apart. For the first time, Nora allowed herself to consider that perhaps her exile might become something more a true home. The next several weeks established a rhythm to Nora's new life. Weekdays were devoted to teaching, evenings to grading papers and preparing lessons, and Sundays to church and quiet walks around Silver Creek. She found herself slowly being accepted into the community, invited to dinners and social gatherings. Bryce Morgan became a regular visitor to the schoolhouse, often stopping by after classes with some pretext delivering books from his father's collection, bringing apples from his orchard, or offering to fix a squeaky floorboard. The children teased her about her cowboy collar, but Nora maintained a professional demeanor, even as she found herself looking forward to his visits. One crisp November afternoon, as the children were filing out at day's end, Bryce arrived with a crate of books. "Found these in the attic," he explained, setting down the heavy load. "Thought some might be suitable for your students." "You're very generous, Mr. Morgan," Nora said, examining the volumes. Many were indeed perfect for her classroom: illustrated natural histories, tales of exploration, even a well-preserved set of McGuffey readers. "Bryce," he corrected. "After all this time, I think you might use my given name, at least when we're not in public." Nora smiled, shelving the books. "Very well, Bryce, and you may call me Nora under the same conditions." He leaned against her desk, watching her work. "Nora," he repeated, as if testing the feel of it. "It suits you." A comfortable silence fell between them as she continued arranging the books. Bryce seemed content just to observe, but Nora sensed he had something on his mind. "Was there something else?" she prompted. He straightened. "Yes, actually. I'm riding up to the North Pasture tomorrow to check on some cattle before winter sets in properly. Thought you might like to come along. Get out of town, see some of the country." The invitation surprised her. "Is it appropriate? A day's ride alone? We wouldn't be alone. Two of my hands are coming. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "your reputation is beyond reproach, Miss Ellis. The town practically considers you a saint after what you did for Tommy." Nora hesitated, then nodded. "I would like that. I haven't seen much beyond Silver Creek since I arrived. I'll collect you at first light. Wear your warmest clothes and sturdy boots if you have them." After he left, Nora sat at her desk, contemplating what had just transpired. She was developing feelings for Bryce Morgan, feelings that both excited and terrified her. In Boston, she had been courted by several eligible men before the scandal, but none had affected her the way this straightforward rancher did. There was something genuine about him, a lack of pretense that made her feel secure in his company. Yet the secret she carried cast a shadow over any potential happiness. If her past came to light, would the people of Silver Creek, would Bryce look at her differently? The thought haunted her as she prepared for bed that night. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost silvering the grass and rooftops. Nora dressed in her warmest clothes, grateful that Martha had insisted on lending her a heavy riding skirt and sturdy boots. Bryce arrived as promised, leading a gentle-looking mare alongside his own larger horse. Two ranch hands waited a discreet distance away, their breath visible in the cold air. "Ever ridden before?" Bryce asked as he helped her mount. "A little," Nora admitted. My father kept horses for carriage and riding. The day that followed was one Nora knew she would treasure regardless of what the future held. They rode through valleys and across streams, the landscape growing wilder and more beautiful as they left civilization behind. Bryce pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the land, his deep knowledge evident in every observation. At midday, they stopped in a sheltered meadow for a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and dried fruit. The ranch hands ate a short distance away, giving them privacy while remaining within sight. "It's so vast," Nora marveled, looking out over the panorama of mountains and forest. "In Boston, one is always aware of boundaries, fences, walls, property lines. Out here it seems endless." "It isn't, though," Bryce replied, his expression thoughtful. "The open range is disappearing year by year. More fences, more boundaries. The world's changing." "Does that trouble you?" He considered the question. "Change itself doesn't. It's inevitable. But I worry about what's lost in the process. There's a freedom here that can't exist in cities." "Freedom has its price," Nora said softly, thinking of her own situation. "Sometimes isolation, sometimes hardship, true enough, but there's community too if you know where to find it." He studied her face. "You found a place in Silver Creek, Nora. People respect you, care for you. And you," the question slipped out before she could stop it. His eyes held hers steadily. "I more than care." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, neither advancing nor retreating from its implications. Finally, Nora looked away, her heart racing. "We should continue if we're to reach the north pasture and return before dark," she said. Bryce respected her implicit request to step back from the precipice of deeper feelings, rising to his feet and extending a hand to help her up. "You're right. There's weather coming in from the west. Better not linger." The afternoon brought them to a high meadow where a small herd of cattle grazed. Bryce and his men checked the animals quickly, noting which ones might need to be brought down to lower elevations before the heavy snows came. On the return journey, the wind picked up, bringing the smell of snow. Clouds rolled in, darkening the late afternoon sky prematurely. "Storm's moving faster than I thought," Bryce called over his shoulder. "We need to pick up the pace." They rode swiftly, but the weather outran them. Fat snowflakes began to fall, quickly becoming a swirling curtain that obscured the trail. Nora pulled her scarf higher around her face, her hands growing numb despite her gloves. Bryce dropped back to ride beside her. "There's a line shack about a mile ahead. We'll shelter there until this passes." The small cabin was barely visible through the snow when they finally reached it. The ranch hands quickly stabled the horses in a lean-to at the back while Bryce ushered Nora inside and set about lighting a fire in the small stove. The line shack was simple but well-maintained, a single room with a stove, a rough-hewn table with benches, and 2 narrow bunks built into the wall. Hunting and fishing equipment hung from pegs, and a shelf held basic provisions. "The men will stay with the horses," Bryce explained, building up the fire. "More comfortable for them and for you." Nora knew he was being considerate of her reputation, ensuring that even in this situation, propriety was maintained as much as possible. As the cabin warmed, Bryce prepared a simple meal from the stored provisions: beans, jerky softened in hot water, and hard biscuits. It was far from the refined fare Nora had grown up with, but hunger made it satisfying. "I'm sorry about the storm," Bryce said as they ate. "Should have trusted my instincts and postponed the trip." "I'm not sorry," Nora replied honestly. "It's been a wonderful day despite the weather." Outside, the snow continued to fall heavily, piling against the single window until only a dim light filtered through. The wind howled around the eaves, emphasizing the coziness within, After their meal, they sat close to the stove, the small space making proximity inevitable. In the flickering light, Nora studied Bryce's profile, the strong jaw, the straight nose, the small scar near his temple. "How did you get that?" she asked, gesturing to the scar. He touched it absently. "Bar fight in Cheyenne when I was 20. Only time I ever got into something like that. Learned my lesson." "What was the fight about?" "A lady's honor." A wry smile crossed his face. "Or what I thought was her honor at the time. Turned out she was perfectly capable of handling the situation herself. Left both me and the other fellow looking foolish." Nora laughed. "A valuable lesson indeed." "I've never been one to rush into things since then," Bryce said, his eyes meeting hers. "I prefer to be certain before I act." The implication was clear, and Nora felt her pulse quicken. "And are you certain now about what?" "About you." His voice was low, serious. "From the moment I saw you step off that stagecoach, something told me you were important, not just to the town, but to me personally." Nora looked down at her hands. "You don't know everything about me." "I know enough. I know you're kind, intelligent, and braver than most men I've met. I know you care deeply about your students. I know you're carrying some burden from your past." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. "Whatever it is, Nora, it doesn't change what I see in you now." Tears pricked at her eyes. "You can't say that without knowing the truth." "Then tell me," he said simply. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." For a long moment, Nora wavered on the edge of confession. The warmth of his hand around hers, the sincerity in his eyes, the isolation of the cabin in the storm all created an intimacy that made secrets seem unnecessary. But fear held her back, fear of seeing his expression change, of watching respect turn to disgust or pity. "I can't," she whispered. "Not yet." Bryce didn't push, he simply nodded, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "When you're ready, then. I'm not going anywhere." They sat in comfortable silence after that, listening to the storm and the crackling of the fire. Eventually, exhaustion began to claim Nora, her head nodding forward as she fought to stay awake. "You should rest," Bryce said, releasing her hand. "Take the bunk nearest the stove. I'll keep watch." Nora was too tired to argue. She removed only her boots before lying down on the narrow bunk, pulling the rough wool blanket over herself. From this position, she could see Bryce silhouetted against the stove's glow, his presence a comforting guardian in the wilderness. Just before sleep claimed her, she murmured, "Thank you, Bryce, for everything." Whether he replied or not, she couldn't say. As darkness enveloped her consciousness, morning came with blinding brightness as sunlight reflected off the new-fallen snow. Nora awoke to find the cabin empty, though the stove still radiated heat. Outside, she could hear voices and the stomping of horses. She quickly put her boots back on and smoothed her hair as best she could before stepping outside. The world had been transformed overnight into a glistening white expanse. Bryce and his men were clearing snow from around the horses' shelter, their breath visible in the cold air. "Good morning," Bryce called when he spotted her. "Storm's past. Should be clear riding back to town." The journey back was slower but beautiful, the landscape pristine under its blanket of snow. By the time they reached Silver Creek, the sun was high, melting the snow on rooftops and creating icicles that sparkled in the light. Martha was waiting anxiously on the boarding house porch. "Thank the Lord you're safe. When the storm hit, we feared the worst." "Mr. Morgan found a shelter," Nora explained as Bryce helped her dismount. "We were quite safe." Martha's expression suggested she had many questions, but propriety kept her from voicing them in front of Bryce and his men. "I'll see you soon, Miss Ellis," Bryce said formally, tipping his hat before mounting his horse again. The use of her surname signaled a return to public decorum, though his eyes conveyed a more personal message. "Thank you again, Mr. Morgan," Nora replied, matching his tone. "The books will be well used in the classroom." As he rode away, Martha ushered Nora inside, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. "Now, tell me everything," she insisted once they were alone. "The whole town's been talking since you didn't return yesterday." Nora sighed, knowing that no matter how innocently she described the adventure, gossip would embellish it. "There's nothing to tell, Martha. The storm caught us by surprise. We sheltered in a line cabin with his ranch hands. This morning we returned, that's all." Martha looked skeptical. "That may be what happened, but I doubt that's all there is to it. I've known Bryce Morgan for 10 years, and I've never seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you." Nora felt her cheeks warm. "We've become friends, nothing more, friends," Martha repeated with a knowing smile. "Well, friendship is a fine foundation for more substantial feelings." Despite her protests, Nora knew Martha was right. What had begun as simple attraction had deepened into something more meaningful during their day together. Bryce Morgan was no longer just the respected rancher who had welcomed her to Silver Creek. He had become someone essential to her happiness. The realization terrified her. Happiness had proven dangerously temporary in the past. Sooner or later, her secret would emerge. Would Bryce still look at her the same way when he learned why she had really left Boston? The question haunted her as she prepared for bed that night. Outside her window, Silver Creek lay quiet under its blanket of snow, the buildings dark except for the saloon down the street where yellow light spilled onto the white ground. It seemed a world away from Boston's elegant drawing rooms and vicious whispers. But no place was far enough to truly escape the past, as Nora would soon discover. December brought preparations for Christmas, with the schoolchildren practicing carols and making decorations for the town's celebration. Nora threw herself into these activities, finding joy in the children's excitement and the community's simple but heartfelt traditions. Bryce continued his visits to the schoolhouse, though they maintained a careful formality in public. Occasionally, when the children were occupied with their work, he would stand beside her desk and speak in low tones about books they had both read or events at the ranch. These brief conversations sustained Nora through the increasingly cold days. One afternoon, as the children were filing out after the final bell, Mayor Peterson appeared at the schoolhouse door. His expression was grave as he approached Nora's desk. "Miss Ellis, might I have a word in private?" Nora's heart skipped a beat, but she maintained her composure. "Of course, Mayor. Children, remember your arithmetic exercises for tomorrow." Once the last child had departed, Peterson closed the door and turned to face her. "A letter arrived for me today from Boston, from the head of the school board there." The blood drained from Nora's face. She gripped the edge of her desk to steady herself. "I see you understand the nature of my concern," Peterson continued. "The letter states that you left under questionable circumstances, that you made serious accusations against a respected gentleman, then fled when those accusations were proven false." "They weren't false," Nora whispered, finding her voice at last. "I spoke the truth." Peterson's expression softened slightly. "Perhaps you believe that, Miss Ellis. But the letter is quite explicit about the damage your claims caused to both the gentleman in question and your own family." "My family chose his reputation over my truth," Nora said, straightening her spine. "As did the school board and everyone else in our social circle." "These are serious matters," Peterson said, pulling at his beard thoughtfully. "The school board will need to discuss this situation. Until then, I think it best if classes are suspended." "You're dismissing me?" Nora asked, her voice breaking. "Temporarily," Peterson clarified. "Until we can determine the best course of action." Silver Creek is a small town, Miss Ellis. Scandal travels fast and cuts deep. After he left, Nora sat motionless at her desk, staring at nothing. The carefully constructed life she had built in Silver Creek was crumbling around her, just as she had feared it would. Soon everyone would know Martha, the children's parents, Bryce. The thought of seeing disgust or doubt in their eyes was unbearable. By the time she returned to the boarding house, word had already spread. Martha met her at the door, her kind face creased with concern. "Oh, my dear girl," she said, pulling Nora into a hug. "People are saying such terrible things." "They're going to dismiss me," Nora said numbly as Martha led her to the kitchen. "The school board." "Not if Bryce has anything to say about it," Martha replied firmly. "He rode out to the Peterson place as soon as he heard, said he wouldn't stand for you being railroaded on the word of strangers." Hope flickered briefly in Nora's heart, only to be extinguished by realism. It won't matter. Once people believe the worst, they rarely change their minds. "That may be true in Boston," Martha said, pouring tea for them both. "But out here, we judge people by their actions, not rumors from 2,000 miles away. You've proven yourself to this town, Nora." Despite Martha's reassurances, Nora spent a restless night, alternating between despair and anger. By morning, she had made a decision. She would not wait to be dismissed or pitied. She would leave Silver Creek on the next stagecoach, just as she had left Boston months before. She was packing her trunk when a commotion outside drew her to the window. Bryce Morgan was dismounting in front of the boarding house, his expression thunderous. Moments later, Martha called up the stairs. "Nora, Bryce Morgan is here to see you, says it's urgent." Taking a deep breath, Nora descended to the parlor where Bryce stood by the window, hat in hand, his posture tense. "You're leaving," he said immediately, noticing her reddened eyes and the dust on her hands from packing. "It's for the best," Nora replied, unable to meet his gaze. "The town doesn't need this scandal." "To hell with what the town needs," Bryce said, his voice rough with emotion. "What about what you need? What about the children who depend on you? They'll find another teacher, one without my complications." Bryce stepped closer, forcing Nora to look up at him. "Tell me the truth, Nora, all of it. I need to hear it from you, not from Peterson or some letter from Boston." The moment had come, the moment she had both dreaded and, in some corner of her heart, longed for. To finally share the burden she had carried alone for so long. "I was teaching at a private girls' school in Boston," Nora began, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "The son of my father's business partner, a man named Edward Hathaway, had developed a habit of taking liberties with young women in our social circle." Bryce's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "He cornered me at a social gathering. When I rejected his advances, he became forceful. I managed to get away, but not before." She swallowed hard. "Not before he tore my dress and left bruises." Bryce's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but still he said nothing. "I learned later that I wasn't the first. 2 of my students had similar experiences but were too frightened to speak out. When I confronted Edward, he laughed and said no one would believe me over him." Bitterness crept into her voice. "He was right. When I went to the school board, they dismissed my claims. When I told my parents, they were horrified not at what had happened to me, but at the scandal I might cause." "So you left," Bryce finished for her. Nora nodded. "My grandmother had left me a small inheritance. I used it to come west, as far from Boston as I could get. I forged letters of recommendation, created a past that wouldn't follow me." Tears spilled down her cheeks now. "I'm a fraud, Bryce. Everything they're saying is true. I did run away." "No," Bryce said firmly, taking her hands in his. "You survived. You protected yourself when no one else would. There's no shame in that, Nora." But the school board can go to hell, Bryce interrupted, along with anyone else who doubts you. Martha, who had been listening quietly from the doorway, stepped forward. Bryce is right, dear. No one who knows you could believe those horrible accusations. Nora looked between them, scarcely able to comprehend their unwavering support. You believe me, just like that? Of course we do, Martha said indignantly. I've known men like this Hathaway, Bryce added, his expression grim. Men who think their money and position put them above consequences. Men who treat women as possessions to be used and discarded. His hands tightened around hers. What happened wasn't your fault, Nora. None of it. For the first time since that terrible night in Boston, Nora felt the crushing weight of shame begin to lift. To be believed, to be supported without question, it was more than she had dared hope for. The town meeting is tonight, Bryce continued. The school board will decide your fate. I want you there, Nora. I want you to face them and tell your story just as you told us. Fear gripped her. I can't. What if they don't believe me? What if they will believe you, Bryce said with quiet certainty. And if they don't, they'll answer to me. The town meeting was held in the church, the only building large enough to accommodate the crowd that gathered. It seemed everyone in Silver Creek had come to witness the proceedings. Nora sat in the front pew, Martha on one side and Bryce on the other, their presence fortifying her against the curious stares and whispered comments. Mayor Peterson called the meeting to order, explaining the purpose with formal gravity. We are here to address serious allegations concerning Miss Ellis's past and to determine her fitness to continue as our schoolteacher. He read portions of the letter from Boston, each word like a knife to Nora's heart. When he finished, a murmur ran through the crowd. Miss Ellis, Peterson said, turning to her, would you care to address these accusations? Nora rose slowly, her legs unsteady but her resolve firm. She told her story again, this time to the entire town, her voice growing stronger with each word. When she described Edward's assault and the subsequent betrayal by those who should have protected her, many in the audience shook their heads in disgust. I came to Silver Creek seeking a fresh start, she concluded. I never meant to deceive anyone. I only wanted to be judged for who I am, not for the lies told about me in Boston. As she sat down, Bryce squeezed her hand in silent support. Then, to her surprise, Clara Stinson stood up. My Tommy wouldn't speak for 8 months after his father died, Clara said, her voice clear in the hushed church. Miss Ellis brought him back to us with her kindness and patience. I don't care what letters say about her past. I judge her by what she's done for my son. One by one, parents stood to speak on Nora's behalf, testifying to improvements in their children's education, to her dedication and compassion. Even the Hallbrook boy's father, the saloon owner, rose to declare that his sons had never shown such interest in learning before Miss Ellis came to town. Finally, Bryce stood. The crowd quieted immediately, such was the respect he commanded. I've lived in Silver Creek all my life, he began, his deep voice carrying to the rafters. I've seen teachers come and go. None has made the difference Miss Ellis has made in just a few months. Are we really going to let some fancy Boston folks tell us who's fit to teach our children? Folks who protected a predator instead of the women he harmed. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the church. Miss Ellis came here carrying a burden of shame that wasn't hers to bear, Bryce continued, his gaze sweeping the room. She said to me, I'm ashamed to my family, and I told her, then I'll be the one who honors you. He turned to look directly at Nora, his eyes filled with a tenderness that took her breath away. I meant those words then, and I mean them now. There is no shame in standing up for what's right, in protecting yourself and others. If her family can't see that, then we will be her family. Silver Creek will be her home. A hush fell over the church as the impact of his words sank in. Then Tommy Stinson stood up, his small voice ringing out clearly. "I want Miss Ellis to stay." The simple statement broke the tension. Voices rose in agreement, hands were raised in support, and within minutes, it became clear that the town had made its decision. Mayor Peterson called for order, then addressed the school board members who sat in a row behind him. "Gentlemen, I believe the town's sentiment is clear. Shall we put it to a formal vote?" The vote was unanimous. Nora Ellis would remain as Silver Creek's teacher, the letter from Boston dismissed as irrelevant to her standing in the community. As people filed out of the church, many stopped to express their support to Nora. Children hugged her, parents shook her hand, and for the first time she felt truly accepted for who she was, past and all. When only a few stragglers remained, Bryce took Nora's hand and led her outside into the clear night air. Stars glittered overhead and their breath formed clouds in the cold. "You meant what you said in there?" Nora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "About honoring me." Bryce turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Every word, but I'd like to be more specific about what I meant." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object that glinted in the moonlight, a simple gold ring with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained, holding it between them. "She always said it should go to the woman who would be my wife when I found her." His blue eyes searched hers. "I've found her, Nora, if you'll have me." Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "After everything you know about me, you still want me as your wife." "Because of everything I know about you," Bryce corrected gently. "Your strength, your kindness, your courage. I love you, Nora Ellis. Every part of you, past and present." "I love you too," she whispered, the words freeing something long trapped within her. "Yes, Bryce Morgan, I will be your wife." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms. Their kiss was tender at first, then deepened with the promise of a future neither had dared imagine before finding each other. Spring came early to Montana territory that year. By March, the snow was melting from the lower meadows, and green shoots were pushing through the soil. On the first truly warm Saturday of the season, Silver Creek gathered to celebrate the wedding of Bryce Morgan and Nora Ellis. The ceremony was held at Morgan Ranch, with wildflowers decorating the porch of the main house and tables set up under the trees. Martha had helped Nora sew a simple but elegant wedding dress of ivory silk, and Bryce wore a new black suit ordered specially from Denver. Tommy Stinson carried the rings on a small cushion, beaming with pride at his important role. Clara served as Nora's matron of honor, and Joseph, Bryce's foreman, stood as best man. Mayor Peterson performed the ceremony, his earlier doubts about Nora long forgotten. As they exchanged vows, Nora looked out at the faces of the townsfolk who had become her true family. They had accepted her, defended her, and loved her despite knowing her past. In their eyes, she saw not shame but pride. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with dancing and feasting under lantern light. As twilight descended, Bryce led Nora away from the revelry to a quiet spot overlooking the ranch. "Happy, Mrs. Morgan?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist from behind. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Nora replied, leaning back against his chest. "I came west looking for escape, but I found something far better." "What's that?" She turned in his arms to face him. "A home, a purpose. A man who honors me not despite my past, but because of the strength it gave me." Bryce kissed her forehead gently. "You honor me too, Nora, every day." As they rejoined their guests, Nora realized that the shame she had carried for so long had transformed into something powerful and healing. In Silver Creek, in Bryce's love, she had found not just acceptance but celebration of who she truly was. The girl who had fled Boston in disgrace was gone. In her place stood Nora Morgan, beloved teacher, respected community member, and cherished wife, a woman who had learned that sometimes the greatest journey is not the one that takes you far from home, but the one that leads you to where you truly belong. Years passed, and the Morgan Ranch prospered under Bryce and Nora's shared stewardship. Nora continued teaching in Silver Creek, watching her students grow and thrive. In time, they had children of their own, first a daughter, Elizabeth, named for Nora's supportive grandmother, and later twin sons, James and William, who inherited their father's height and their mother's love of books. Occasionally, letters arrived from Boston news of Edward Hathaway's eventual disgrace when other women finally found the courage to speak against him. And much later, a tentative olive branch from Nora's aging parents. She responded with kindness, but maintained the boundaries that protected her hard-won peace. Her true family was in Silver Creek, in the community that had embraced her, and the man who had honored his promise to honor her every day of their lives together. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch lay peaceful under the vast Montana sky, Bryce and Nora would sit together on the porch, hands entwined, marveling at the journey that had brought them together and the love that had transformed them both. For in finding each other, they had each found their true home not in a place, but in the sanctuary of unconditional acceptance. The shame that had once defined Nora's existence had given way to pride, and the loneliness that had shadowed Bryce's life had yielded to the joy of a family built on love, respect, and honor. Together, they had written a new story, one that would echo through generations to come, a testament to the healing power of love and the strength that comes from being truly seen and valued for exactly who you are.